Hey there, this is Conflict Tales. You won't believe what went down this time. Let's dive into the madness. I had been away for 6 months, taking care of my sick mother in another state, and when I finally returned home, I found a goddamn swimming pool on my property. Not a small inflatable one, not a temporary setup, an actual in-ground pool, surrounded by a neatly paved patio, sun loungers, and a white fence with a metal plaque that read, "For homeowner association members only." At first, I thought I'd lost my mind. I stood there, gripping the straps of my duffel bag, staring at the shimmering water like it was some kind of mirage. But the sound of laughter and splashing quickly snapped me back to reality. A group of kids played in the water while their parents relaxed on the loungers, sipping drinks. My blood pressure skyrocketed. I stormed over to the nearest woman, a middle-aged brunette in a floral sundress, and asked what the hell was going on. She gave me an amused look and gestured toward the houses beyond the fence. "Oh, you must be new here. This is the homeowner association pool. You should have received the community guidelines by now." I clenched my jaw. This isn't an homeowner association lot. This is my land. Her smile faltered, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Oh, Harry, you're finally back!" Karen, the bane of my existence. A plump, overly confident woman in a pastel blouse and oversized sunglasses, striding toward me like she owned the place. "I was wondering when you'd show up. We've been waiting to discuss your contribution to the community." I turned to her, barely containing my rage. "Contribution? You built a pool on my land without my permission." She let out a high-pitched chuckle. "Well, technically it was unused land, and we assumed it was abandoned since you weren't maintaining it. The homeowner association voted on repurposing it for the good of the neighborhood." My fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. "You assumed my land was abandoned? Did you even check the property records before pulling this stunt?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Harry, let's not get caught up in technicalities. It's just a pool. A wonderful addition, don't you think?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself from blowing up in front of half the neighborhood. "This is trespassing, Karen. This is theft." Her expression darkened, the condescending amusement in her eyes replaced with something sharper. "Now, Harry, I'd hate for this to get ugly. The homeowner association has already incorporated this space into our official community map. If you fight this, you might find yourself in a legal battle you won't win." That was it. I turned on my heel and stomped straight to my house. I threw my bags inside and grabbed my toolbox. If they thought they could steal my land while I was away, they had another thing coming. Without hesitation, I marched back outside and headed straight for the water pump connected to the pool. Karen's shrill voice rang out behind me. "Harry, what are you doing? Stop right now!" I yanked open the maintenance panel and twisted the drainage valve as hard as I could. The water began to recede rapidly, a swirling vortex pulling the stolen luxury straight down the drain. The sunbathers leapt to their feet, shouting while kids scrambled out of the pool, squealing in dismay. Chaos erupted within seconds. Karen rushed toward me, her face turning a deep shade of red. "You absolute maniac! You can't do this!" I met her furious glare with my own. "Watch me." The last of the water gurgled down the pipes, leaving the once pristine pool an empty concrete shell. That was when she pulled out her phone. "Fine. You want to play dirty? Let's play dirty." I barely had time to process what was happening before the sound of sirens filled the air. I turned my head just in time to see a police cruiser roll up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, one of them adjusting his belt as he approached. "Sir, we received a report of vandalism in progress. Mind explaining what's going on?" Karen immediately stepped in, her voice trembling with well-rehearsed distress. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man destroyed homeowner association property. He drained our community pool without permission. He's been aggressive and unhinged since he got back. I'm honestly afraid for my safety." My jaw nearly hit the floor. "Are you kidding me? This is my land. That pool was built illegally while I was gone." The officer sighed and pulled out his notepad. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" I took a deep breath, realizing just how much trouble I was in. I could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me, some whispering, others watching with satisfaction. "Yes, I do. I have documents inside." The officer exchanged glances with his partner. "All right, let's take a look. But just so you know, the homeowner association has already filed a complaint against you for property damage. You'll be receiving a court summons soon." Karen smirked behind them, arms crossed in smug victory. I could already see the battle lines being drawn. This was far from over. I sat in my kitchen, gripping a mug of coffee so tightly my knuckles ached. The officers had left after checking my property deed, but their parting words still rang in my ears. "You'll need to sort this out in court." A lawsuit. They were actually taking me to court over my own land. Karen had strutted away like she'd already won, her smug smirk seared into my memory. The arrogance, the sheer audacity of it all, made my blood boil. I needed legal help. I wasn't about to let some overreaching homeowner association rob me blind while I stood there like an idiot. My first call was to a local real estate attorney, Mark Holloway, a sharp-witted man in his late 50s who had a reputation for taking down predatory homeowner associations. I explained everything over the phone, and after a long pause he let out a low whistle. "That's a hell of a mess, Harry. But you've got rights, and they're standing on shaky ground if what you're telling me is true. Meet me tomorrow morning, bring every document you have. We'll go from there." That night, sleep was impossible. I paced my living room, scrolling through every article I could find about property disputes with homeowner associations. The more I read, the angrier I became. These organizations thrived on intimidation, preying on people who didn't have the resources to fight back. But I wasn't just anyone. They had picked the wrong guy to mess with. I went outside and stared at the drained pool, now a sunken pit of dry concrete, glaring at it as if I could will it out of existence. The thought of Karen sitting in her plush homeowner association meetings, gloating about how she had taken care of the problem, made me sick. Morning came, and I found myself sitting across from Mark in his dimly lit office. He sifted through my property records, occasionally humming to himself. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Your title is solid. The issue is that they filed paperwork with the county while you were gone, listing the land as abandoned municipal space. The only way they pulled that off is by proving you hadn't maintained it for an extended period. You were gone 6 months, long enough for them to make their move. It's shady as hell, but technically legal until we challenge it." I clenched my jaw. "So, what do we do?" Mark tapped his fingers on his desk. "We hit them with a counterclaim. If we can prove they tampered with property lines without notifying you, their entire case falls apart. The key is finding who approved this paperwork and how. Someone in the county office had to sign off on it. And if there's one thing I know about homeowner association scams, it's that they always leave a paper trail." The plan was set. While Mark dug into legal channels, I would gather evidence on my end. First stop, my neighbor, Bob Langley. Bob had lived in this town longer than I had and saw everything that happened around here. If anyone knew when and how this so-called public space designation happened, it would be him. Bob answered the door, squinting at me like he was trying to place a long-lost relative. "Well, I'll be damned, Harry. Thought you moved away for good. What's this I hear about a lawsuit?" I sighed. "You heard right. Homeowner associations claiming my land as their own. They built a pool on it while I was gone. You see anything while I was away?" Bob scratched his chin, then gestured for me to follow him to his back porch. "Now that you mention it, I did see some surveyors poking around a few months back. Didn't think much of it at the time. Figured maybe you were selling the place." Then one day, trucks rolled in, and before you know it, they had that whole damn pool set up. Karen was running around barking orders like she was some kind of queen. My pulse quickened. "You think they had permits?" Bob snorted. "Hell if I know. But I do know they were real careful about working fast. Like they didn't want anyone asking questions." That was all I needed to hear. If homeowner association had cut corners and skipped proper permits, I could use that against them in court. I shook Bob's hand, thanked him, and headed straight to the county office to request records on the pool construction. If Karen thought she could steamroll me into submission, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. On the way, I stopped by another neighbor, a retired contractor named Bill Henderson. If anyone could tell whether the pool construction had been done by the book, it was him. Bill took one look at the photos on my phone and let out a low chuckle. This ain't legal. I can tell just by the way that foundation's set. That's rushed work. And if I had to guess, they didn't pull permits for excavation either. That was the second confirmation I needed. I was building a case, piece by piece. With every bit of information I uncovered, I felt my determination grow. They thought I would roll over, take their settlement, and go away quietly. But they had underestimated me. I was about to make this the biggest headache of their lives. The trip to the county office was an exercise in frustration. I waited in line for nearly an hour before finally getting to the records clerk, a bored-looking woman in her late 40s who barely glanced up from her screen when I explained what I needed. She sighed and typed sluggishly, clicking around before shaking her head. "Sorry, sir, I don't see any permits for a pool construction under your name. Maybe you should check with the homeowner association?" My jaw tightened. "I'm not with the homeowner association. This is my property, and I need to see if anyone filed permits for construction on it while I was away." She hesitated, then started typing again. A few minutes later, she frowned and leaned in closer to her monitor. That's strange. There's a permit request for excavation filed about 5 months ago, but it was withdrawn a week later. No official approval, no final signatures. Just gone." My pulse quickened. Withdrawn by whom? She squinted. "Looks like it was canceled by a Karen Whitmore on behalf of the homeowner association." Of course, that explained the rushed construction, the sloppy work. They had tried to do it legally at first, but when they realized they couldn't get the paperwork to go through, they went ahead anyway. I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my temper in check. "Can I get a copy of that record?" The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "It's public record. Give me a second." She printed out the documents and I snatched them up, scanning the pages. This was exactly what I needed. I left the office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They had built the pool illegally, and now I had proof. I called Mark as soon as I got to my truck. "Mark, you're going to want to see what I just found. The homeowner association applied for a permit but canceled it before getting approval. They built the damn thing anyway." He chuckled dryly. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. That's a legal disaster waiting to happen. Meet me at my office in an hour." I grinned despite the tension coiling in my gut. Finally, I had them cornered. Back at Mark's office, we laid out the evidence. The withdrawn permit, Bob's eyewitness account, and the contractor's assessment that the pool was structurally unsound. "They didn't just build it without permission," Mark said, tapping the documents. "They built it knowing it was illegal. That means they committed fraud when they incorporated the land into their homeowner association map." I let out a slow breath. "So, what's our next move?" Mark leaned back, steepling his fingers. "We send them a formal notice. They have 2 choices. Either they remove the pool at their own expense and compensate you for the damage, or we take this to court and hit them with fraud, trespassing, and illegal land seizure charges. If we go to trial, I'll subpoena the county records and expose everything. They won't stand a chance." I liked the sound of that. Karen had spent months thinking she was untouchable, manipulating her way through bureaucratic loopholes. It was time she learned otherwise. Mark drafted the letter that afternoon and had it couriered directly to the homeowner association office. By the next morning, I had a voicemail waiting from an unknown number. I pressed play. "Mr. Davis, this is Charles Redford, legal counsel for the Lakeside Homeowner Association. We received your notice. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to discuss a resolution that benefits all parties. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." I listened twice, picking apart his tone. He was trying to sound calm, professional, but I could hear the strain beneath it. They were panicking. I called Mark and played him the message. He chuckled. "They're scrambling. They thought you'd cave, but now they know you're serious. Don't call them yet. Let them stew for a day or two. We want them nervous." I spent the next 24 hours ignoring calls from the homeowner association's attorney while Mark prepared our formal case. Meanwhile, Karen made one last desperate attempt to intimidate me. Around dusk, as I was checking my mailbox, she marched up my driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Harry," she greeted, her voice saccharine sweet, but her eyes flashing with frustration. "Why are you doing this? We could have worked something out. You didn't have to go this far." I crossed my arms. "You built a pool on my land and now you want to act like I'm the unreasonable one?" She exhaled sharply. "It was for the community. You don't even use this land." I shook my head. "Doesn't matter. It's mine, and now you're going to pay for what you did." Her lips pursed, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression. Doubt, maybe even fear. She knew she was out of options. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stomped away. I watched her go, feeling the shift in the air. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh barrage of calls from the homeowner association's attorney, but I let them go to voicemail. Mark had told me to hold off, and I trusted his judgment. Instead, I took my coffee outside and stood at the edge of my property, staring at the empty pool. Without the glistening water to mask its imperfections, the rushed construction was obvious. Cracks had already begun forming along the edges, and the foundation looked uneven. The more I looked, the more I realized just how shoddy the whole thing was. It wasn't just illegal. It was dangerous. Around noon, Mark called. "All right, Harry, we've let them sweat long enough. Call Redford back and see what he has to say, but keep it short. We don't want to give them any wiggle room." I dialed the number, and within seconds, Charles Redford picked up. "Mr. Davis, thank you for returning my call. I believe we can come to a reasonable agreement regarding this situation." I kept my voice even. "That depends. What exactly are you offering?" He hesitated, clearly not expecting me to be so direct. "The homeowner association is willing to cover the cost of removing the pool and restoring the property to its original state. Additionally, we'd like to offer you a financial settlement to compensate for any inconvenience this has caused you." I leaned against my truck, listening carefully. "How much?" Redford cleared his throat. $10,000. I laughed. "That's a joke, right? You stole my land, built on it illegally, and now you think 10 grand makes it all go away? Try again." He sighed. "Mr. Davis, let's be reasonable. This is a community matter, and we want to handle it amicably. Taking this to court would be costly for both parties." I didn't let up. "You're right, it would be costly. For you. I have proof of fraud, trespassing, and illegal construction. If we go to trial, your clients won't just lose. They'll be looking at serious legal repercussions." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice tighter. "What do you want?" I glanced at the pool again, feeling the weight of what they had tried to pull. "I want full compensation for the damage to my property, including legal fees, and I want homeowner association leadership to publicly acknowledge their wrongdoing. If you can't deliver that, we go to court." Another pause. "That's a significant request. I'll have to discuss it with my clients." I smiled. "You do that? But just so you know, the price goes up if you drag this out any longer." I hung up before he could respond. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Bob Langley strolled over with a beer in hand. "Heard you're giving them hell," he said, sitting down beside me. I chuckled. "Just making sure they don't get away with it." Bob took a long sip before nodding. "Good. People like Karen think they can do whatever they want because no one stands up to them. But you did. And win or lose, that counts for something." His words stuck with me long after he left. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was making sure they didn't pull this stunt on anyone else. The next morning, my phone rang again. It was Redford. "Mr. Davis, my clients have reconsidered. They're willing to meet your terms, with a few conditions." I let him talk, but I already knew how this would end. Karen and the homeowner association had finally realized they had no way out. It was only a matter of time before they crumbled completely. By midday, Mark called again, letting me know that Redford had sent over a draft settlement agreement. I scanned through it carefully. They agreed to pay for the demolition and full restoration of my land, but the monetary compensation they were offering was still low. I called Mark. "They bumped the number up to 20 grand. Still not enough." Mark sighed. "They're testing you. They'll go higher. Hold the line." I spent the rest of the day gathering more documentation. If they thought I was bluffing, they were about to get a rude awakening. I went to the county office to request the historical land ownership records, ensuring I had every piece of paperwork proving my ownership. I made copies of all communication with the homeowner association, including the threats Karen had made early on. If they pushed me too far, I would make sure the whole town knew what they had done. By the evening, Redford called again. "Mr. Davis, my clients have increased their offer to $30,000. This is our final offer." I smirked. "That's a start, but I want 40, and I want a signed statement from the homeowner association admitting they acted improperly. Otherwise, we go to trial." Another long pause. "Fine, I'll speak with my clients. Expect an answer tomorrow." I hung up, exhaling slowly. Karen had spent months thinking she was untouchable. Now she was on the verge of a complete loss, and I wasn't going to let up until every last bit of damage was undone. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Mark with the final counteroffer from Redford and the homeowner association. $40,000, full restoration of my land, and a written public statement acknowledging their wrongdoing. I read through it twice, letting the reality sink in. They had caved. Karen had lost. I forwarded the email back to Mark with a simple reply. "Accept it. Let's get this over with." The official signing was scheduled for the following afternoon. Mark insisted I meet him at his office first to go over the paperwork in detail. I arrived early, my stomach a knot of anticipation. Mark greeted me with a grin, handing me a thick folder. They folded faster than I expected. I think Karen realized she couldn't weasel out of this one without losing even more. "Read everything carefully before we sign." I flipped through the pages, scanning each clause. The agreement was airtight. The homeowner association was legally bound to cover all costs associated with removing the pool and restoring my land to its original state. The financial settlement would be wired to my account within 72 hours, and Karen, along with the homeowner association board, was required to issue a public statement admitting to their misconduct. I looked up at Mark. This feels surreal. After all the crap they put me through, they're actually backing down. He chuckled. "You forced their hand, Harry. That's what happens when bullies finally meet someone who pushes back." We drove to the law firm representing the homeowner association. Redford greeted us with the same stiff professionalism he'd maintained throughout the ordeal, but there was a tension in his expression, a subtle admission of defeat. Karen was nowhere to be seen. I smirked, knowing she was probably too humiliated to face me. "Let's get this done," Redford said, sliding the documents across the table. Mark and I reviewed every line one last time before I finally picked up the pen and signed my name. With that, it was over. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't just about the money or getting my land back. It was about standing my ground and making sure they didn't pull this on someone else. Karen and her homeowner association had been exposed for what they were, a corrupt, power-hungry group that thought they could take whatever they wanted. Not this time. 2 days later, a demolition crew arrived to begin tearing down the pool. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee watching as they worked. The sound of jackhammers and heavy machinery filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, it was a noise I welcomed. Bob walked over from his house nodding approvingly at the chaos. "Damn shame they built that thing in the first place. But at least you got 'em to clean up their own mess. As the days passed, word spread fast around town about Karen's downfall. The public statement had gone out, and people weren't happy. Residents who had once blindly followed homeowner association rules started questioning what else had been done under the table. A few board members resigned, and Karen, she disappeared. Some said she moved out of town, others claimed she was still holed up in her house, refusing to show her face. I didn't really care. She wasn't my problem anymore. A week later, the land was fully restored. The pool was gone, the ground leveled, and fresh soil laid down. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been stolen. Mark called to check in, but his tone was lighter this time. "So, what's next for you, Harry? You taking a vacation with that settlement money?" I laughed. "Nah, I think I'll stick around and make sure nobody else tries to pull something like this again. Someone's got to keep these homeowner associations in check." That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my land. No fences, no unauthorized construction, no entitled homeowner association members claiming what wasn't theirs. Just peace. And for the first time in months, I finally felt like I was home. As the weeks passed, I heard more about what had happened within the homeowner association after the settlement. Karen had not only resigned but had been removed from any leadership roles she held in other community organizations. Several residents banded together demanding a complete audit of homeowner association finances, and what they found wasn't pretty. Thousands of dollars in miscellaneous fees had been redirected for personal use by Karen and her close allies. More lawsuits followed. The whole structure of the homeowner association began to collapse under its own corruption, and I had front row seats to watch it burn. One afternoon, Bob stopped by again, beer in hand. "Heard they're dissolving the homeowner association altogether. Too much bad press, too many lawsuits. Looks like you did more than just win your case." I grinned. About time someone stood up to them. Maybe now people will think twice before letting a bunch of self-important busybodies run their lives. Months later, with the homeowner association gone, things settled into a new normal. My land was mine again, free and clear. No unexpected fines, no intrusive rules, just open space and quiet. The victory wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever been pushed around by a corrupt system. And if another homeowner association ever tried to mess with me, they'd know exactly what they were up against.